The perfect facade. Hello. If you had run into me at a coffee shop about 5 years ago, you probably would have thought I had it all. You would have seen a woman in her mid-20s, dressed in a well-fitted outfit, her hair always neat, typing intently on her laptop with a latte by her side. You might have seen me smile at the waiter, or occasionally lift my head to look out the window with a dreamy, confident gaze. On social media, my life was a string of perfect photos, spontaneous trips, chic dinners with friends, and creative work projects marked completed with flying colors. I was the model of a successful, dynamic young person, always bursting with energy. My friends called me the sun because I was always the life of the party, always coming up with wild but captivating ideas. My old boss used to say my energy could light up the entire office. And I believed it. I believed in the character I had created for myself. For 10 years, from the end of high school until I was well into my career, I lived behind a mask called normal. In fact, it was more than normal. It was a kind of superiority. I had a superpower. That's how I explained it to myself. There were weeks when I'd only sleep 2 or 3 hours a night but could get a month's worth of work done. Ideas flowed like a waterfall. I could write a 30-page marketing plan in one night, design a brand identity in 2 days, or learn a new skill online with just a few tutorials. During those periods, the world felt like a fast-motion movie, and I was the main character holding the remote control. I talked more, faster, and laughed louder. I felt smarter, funnier, and more charming than anyone. I'd splurge on a trip to Dalat just because I saw a pretty picture on Instagram, or buy an expensive camera because I was convinced I was about to become a great photographer. Anything was possible. All barriers were invisible. It was the feeling of being on top of the world. And I loved that feeling. I was addicted to it. But whatever goes up must come down. After those euphoric streaks, my superpower would run out. I called it crashing or burnout. I explained to everyone and to myself that it was the inevitable result of working too hard. Sounded reasonable, right? Anyone who works like a machine needs time to recharge. But my recharging didn't look like anyone else's. It wasn't a peaceful weekend getaway. It was a disappearance. I could lie in bed for 3 straight days in a pitch-black room, curtains drawn tight. I wouldn't answer my phone or read my messages. The doorbell would make me jump, and I'd just want to curl up into a ball. The joy was gone. The world's colors seemed to have been drained away, leaving only black and white. The grand ideas from the previous week now looked foolish and delusional. The expensive things I'd bought in my state of euphoria now lay in the corner of my room, mocking my impulsiveness. Guilt and shame would wash over me. Guilt for disappearing on my friends without a word. Shame for failing to maintain the perfect image I had built. I would stare at the pile of work waiting for me, the unread emails, and feel a complete paralysis. My body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The simplest tasks, like brushing my teeth or taking a shower, required a monumental effort. My brain, once an idea factory, was now just a thick fog. I couldn't think, couldn't focus, couldn't feel. There was only an emptiness, a deep, nameless sadness. And then, after a few days or sometimes a week or two, the fog would lift. The energy would start to return, slowly at first, and then it would skyrocket. And the cycle would begin again. I'd become the sun once more, laughing, talking, and working like crazy, trying to make up for the time I was missing. Everyone would breathe a sigh of relief. Thank God she's okay, they'd think. And I thought so too. I told myself I was just a bit moody, that everyone has their ups and downs. I was just someone with more intense emotions than others. I clung to that explanation like a life raft, because the truth, if it wasn't normal, then what was it? That thought was too terrifying to face. I lived like that for 10 years. A life on a roller coaster with dazzling peaks and dark valleys, while I tried to keep smiling and waving as if I was enjoying the ride. But deep down I knew something was wrong. The cost of pretending to be normal grew steeper. The exhaustion was no longer just physical. It was an erosion of the soul. I started to fear the highs because I knew a freefall would inevitably follow. I also feared the lows because I never knew if I'd be able to climb back out this time. I was trapped between two people, and neither of them was the real me. The unavoidable collapse. The loop continued, and over time, its swings became more extreme. The highs got higher and the lows got deeper. The collapse didn't come gradually. It came like an avalanche, triggered by a single small pebble. That pebble was a major project at work. It was my chance to prove myself, to solidify the star employee image I had worked so hard to build. And, of course, I took on the project while I was at the peak of a manic phase. I felt invincible. I stood before the board of directors and promised extraordinary results. I presented a bold, complex plan. A plan that probably needed a team of 5 people 3 months to complete. But I believed I could do it alone in 6 weeks. I threw myself into the work like a moth to a flame. The office became my home. All-nighters became the norm. Coffee and energy drinks were my main meals. I bought new software and expensive gadgets that I believed were essential for the project's success. I turned down every invitation from my friends. "I'm swamped," I'd reply curtly to their texts at 3 a.m. I felt like I was creating a masterpiece. Every detail was perfect in my head. But reality was different. Due to sleep deprivation, I started making stupid mistakes. Because I was overconfident, I didn't consult anyone. I was working alone inside my own euphoric bubble. And that bubble was about to burst. The crash came faster than I expected this time. Just 2 weeks before the deadline, my energy vanished. It was like someone pulled the plug. That morning, I couldn't get myself out of bed. The thought of facing the half-finished project, of the promises I had made, felt like a crushing weight on my chest. I turned off my phone. Called in sick. 1 day, then 2, then a whole week. I lay in the darkness, drowning in paralysis and panic. The emails from my boss, the missed calls from colleagues and friends, they felt like hammers pounding against the silence of my room. I knew I had failed. And not just on a project. It was the collapse of the entire false identity I had built. The mask had shattered, and I didn't have the strength to piece it back together. On the 5th day of my disappearance, there was a knock on the door. Not a gentle tap, but a firm, insistent banging. I curled up on the bed, hoping the person would go away. But the banging continued, followed by the familiar voice of Lynn, my best friend. "Open the door. I know you're in there. You can't just disappear like this." I didn't answer. A moment later, I heard the jingle of keys. Lynn had a spare key to my apartment, a precaution we'd taken after a few of my previous crashes. The door opened, and light from the hallway flooded the dark, messy room. Lynn stood at the doorway, looking at me curled up in my blanket, then at the room littered with old food containers and scattered clothes. Her expression wasn't anger, but a deep, aching worry. She didn't yell at me. She just sat down on the edge of the bed and was quiet for a long time. Then she said, her voice soft but firm, "This isn't burnout anymore. This isn't just being a little tired, or needing a rest. Something is really going on, and you're fighting it all by yourself. You can't keep going on like this." Tears started to stream down my face. For the first time in years, I let someone see me this vulnerable. I broke into sobs, releasing the pent-up cries of loneliness, fear, and exhaustion. I told Lynn everything. About the superpowers, the free-falling crashes, the feeling of having 2 people at war inside me. I told her everything in shame, expecting judgment. But Lynn just listened. She took my hand and said, "You're not crazy. You're just in pain. And you don't have to go through it alone anymore. I'm here with you. We'll figure this out together." That moment was the bottom of the abyss. But it was also the first time I saw a flicker of light. For the first time, I didn't have to climb back up on my own. A hand had reached out for me. Lynn's words were an anchor, holding me steady before I was completely swept away. Admitting I needed help was scarier than facing my failure at work. It meant giving up the illusion that I could control everything. It meant facing my biggest fear, that I wasn't normal. But looking into Lynn's determined eyes, I knew I had no other choice. The pretense was over. The wall I had built around myself had completely crumbled. And there, in the rubble, at my most raw and vulnerable, I made a decision. I would go find answers. I would find out what the hell was going on with me. Meeting the real me. The journey to find answers began with an appointment with a psychologist Lynn had found for me. Sitting in the waiting room, I felt like a fraud. I looked at the people around me and wondered, do I really belong here? The shame was still there. A part of me wanted to run, to go home, pull the curtains, and pretend the conversation with Lynn never happened. But I stayed. I thought about my exhaustion, about my friends' worried eyes, and I knew I couldn't turn back. When the doctor called my name, I took a deep breath and walked in. I told her my story, the same one you've just heard. I told her about the highs and the lows, the infinite energy and the crushing paralysis. I was terrified of being judged, of being called dramatic or weak. But the doctor listened patiently. She nodded, took notes, and asked questions no one had ever asked me before. She didn't ask, "Why are you sad?" She asked, "Tell me about the times you feel like you can do anything." She didn't ask, "How can you be happier?" She asked, "What thoughts come to mind when you can't get out of bed?" For the first time, someone saw both sides of the coin, both people inside of me, and didn't seem scared or confused. After a few sessions and some assessments, she looked at me and said something that would change my life forever. "What you're experiencing has a name. It's called bipolar disorder, specifically type II. Bipolar disorder." The two words hung in the air. My first reaction was denial. Bipolar. Wasn't that what people used to describe crazy people? People whose moods swung wildly from one minute to the next? That wasn't me. I was stable for weeks, sometimes months at a time. But then the doctor explained. She explained that my periods of superpower weren't just positive energy. They were hypomania, a state of abnormally elevated energy, a decreased need for sleep and racing thoughts. And the crashes were major depressive episodes. Having a name for it was both terrifying and strangely liberating. Terrifying because it confirmed I had a chronic illness. But liberating because finally it all made sense. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't weak. I wasn't just moody. I had a medical condition, a chemical imbalance in my brain that could explain the last 10 years of chaos. All the scattered pieces of my life suddenly clicked into place. The diagnosis wasn't a magic wand. It didn't heal me overnight. It was the starting point of a new journey. Learning to live with my condition. It was a challenging process. I had to try different medications to find the right fit, a process that can take months and come with difficult side effects. I attended therapy weekly to learn how to recognize the early warning signs of an oncoming episode. I learned about the importance of routine. Getting enough sleep was no longer an option. It was my medicine. A stable schedule wasn't boring. It was an anchor. I learned to say no. I learned to accept that I don't have superpowers. Stable, sustainable productivity is so much more important than the cycle of boom and bust. Perhaps the hardest part was learning to love my real self, an imperfect person with limitations. I had to learn to forgive myself for the mistakes I made during hypomanic episodes and to be patient with myself during the depressive days. I had to open up to my family and a few close friends. Those were difficult conversations, but they broke down the isolation I had trapped myself in for so many years. Today, my life is very different. It doesn't have the breathtaking highs, but it also doesn't have the crushing, desperate lows. It's calmer. It's more deliberate. I'm still a creative person, I still have passions, but now I pursue them sustainably. I still have bad days, days when the fog returns. But now I have the tools to cope. I have a support network. I know that it will pass. I have replaced the mask of normalcy with something far more precious. Authenticity. If any part of my story sounds familiar to you, if you also feel like you're living two different lives, if you also have superpowers and unexplained crashes, I want you to know this. You are not alone. And you are not crazy or weak. What you are feeling is real. Seeking help is an act of courage, not weakness. Talk to someone you trust. Reach out to a professional. Having a name for what you're going through can be the first step to taking back control of your life. This journey isn't easy, but it is so worth it. Because on the other side of the pretense, you won't find a boring, normal person. You will find yourself an authentic, resilient, and worthy person, whole just as you are. Thank you for watching.